Okay, I'm Brendan Walker, and today I'm going to give you a rapid introduction to my new project, chromo11, Engineering the Thrill, and I hope I don't give you heartburn after your lunch. Over the next year, I plan to investigate thrill in a contemporary setting, how we naturally experience thrill, and how it might be practically engineered. The result will be an original set of proposals for new fantastic rides and experiences that will create new thrills. Today I'm going to explain the approach I'm taking over this next year and also some of the inspiration behind my work. So thrill is a multifaceted thing. So when I talk about thrill, I'm not just referring to the obvious stereotypes of fast cars and fast women. Clearly, it's more complicated than that. I currently run a creative practice specialising in kinetic installations, and I'm a research fellow in interaction design at the Royal College of Art. However, I was originally trained in aeronautical engineering and worked for British Aerospace military aircraft for many years. Some projects I worked on were Sidewinder missile systems for the Hawk 200 and also on the new Eurofighter. And also spent many weekends experimenting with ejector seat systems, firing them into safety nets over the Ribble in Blackpool. So a basic physics lesson. Imagine a body free-falling through space over a distance s1 to be decelerated over a distance s2, coming to rest eventually at ground level. Quite thrilling, you'd imagine, but how many different ways can this be interpreted? Firstly, if you imagine the skydiver who'll spend hours preparing his equipment only to make a solitary unseen flight through the air, coming to rest gradually using his parachute. Compare this to the exhibitionist, the high diver in Acapulco, whose only equipment is a pair of trunks and a margarita, but has to have an incredible amount of skill not to break his back on entry into the water. And here's an astronaut training, repetitive training to make the experience of free fall a usual experience to him, so it's no longer a novelty. And this is a picture of a woman jumping from a hotel window in 1946 in Arizona. She was the only person to survive, and in fact broke both her legs in the fall. And it definitely wasn't a thrilling experience for her, but the photographer, Arnold Harold, caught this on film, and he actually went on to win the Pulitzer Prize with this photograph, so probably a thrilling experience for him. And this is a proposal by Monsieur Caron in 1898 for a ride from Eiffel Tower, in which he proposed that people would sit inside a capsule and be dropped 300 metres into a champagne glass-shaped pond below to break their fall. And unfortunately, the ride never made it off the drawing board, and fortunately for the riders, because they would have plunged to their definite death. So all those examples illustrate the same basic bodily physics, but it's the context and the mental journey that make them so uniquely different. So the science of thrill. Thrill describes the euphoria experienced in response to novel stimuli. Thrill evolved as a mechanism to reward activities such as sating hunger, quenching thirst, or rewarding fulfilling sex, all to do about the survival of the human race. But in today's society, where things are a lot more complex, thrill's rewarding all sorts of activities. When we become stimulated, our bodies release high levels of the chemical dopamine, the chemical messenger dopamine. And this is received by the gene D4DR, which lives on chromosome 11, initiating reward feedback to the brain, creating euphoria and thrill. But it's been found that people with a shorter gene, a shorter version of the gene, receive the dopamine a lot easier and can become stimulated by lower levels of activities, such as the glove fetishist. But people with a longer version find it more difficult to bind with the dopamine and need to seek increasingly higher levels of stimulation in order to be thrilled. But this doesn't explain why, within the same gene pool, this father and son, why is the son ecstatic at this ride, whilst the father's pretty nonplussed? Let's put the genes to one side for the moment. Let's have a look at the mechanics of thrill. You see increasing levels of novel stimulation across the bottom axes, with increasing levels of arousal as a result on the vertical axis. You can see there's an optimum level of novelty which causes the maximum level of arousal, and this is where thrill occurs. And before that, say if you're riding a roller coaster, you'd like it to go faster and faster, but past that you'd like to back up a little bit and go slower. So this is a basic model. Now if you consider two different people on the same graph, the amount of stimulation that was creating thrill in person 1 is barely registering any kind of arousal on person 2. And in fact, person 2 has to go and seek higher levels of stimulation to achieve the same level of thrill that person 1 had already achieved. And also with novelty, there's an element called perceived risk with any novel experience. Now, risk isn't, people don't seek to maximize risk. A racing car driver will always still wear his safety belt, but it always comes hand in hand with novel stimulation. But you can see here now that as we have increasing levels of stimulation, a point where the risk actually outweighs the reward of arousal, you actually want to withdraw from the situation, you want to get off the ride. And knowing these curves and this perceived risk is something that car manufacturers play on. So juxtaposing images of fast cars with the safety of airbags, and they use this technique to actually increase their market share. And now when you look at two different people with two sets of arousal curves and two sets of risk curves, you can see that the story starts to get rather complicated. So, the thrill connoisseur. When talking about thrill, the popular press is fixated with the exotic thrill seeker, people who search out extreme sports for kicks. But these people should actually be termed sensation seekers, people who search for stimulation to achieve the same thrill that most people don't have trouble seeking in normal life. In a different light, they could be viewed as emotionally impotent. I'm more interested in the thrill connoisseur, a person who appreciates the finer points of thrill regardless of the stimulation levels required. So here's a queue of people waiting to ride Disneyland Tokyo's Thunder Mountain. But who are these people and what makes them tick? A group of biosociologists in the States developed a scale called the sensation-seeking scale, which is divided into 4 subcategories. The thrill and adventure-seeking scale, to do with extreme stuff. Experience-seeking scale, to do with novelty through mind and senses. Disinhibition, to do with unconventional or illegal activities. And susceptibility to boredom. And each person actually has a sensation-seeking scale point, and they use a questionnaire to derive these figures. But then they went on to correlate these figures to other factors such as national differences, age and sex, racial, socioeconomic differences, religious, birth order and vocational. And they're able to come up with such gems as firefighters are high sensation seekers, but also have a high susceptibility to boredom, low susceptibility, get that the right way around, which is great because they actually spend 95% of their time polishing their engines. And police forces routinely use this type of profiling to determine a criminal type. But this needs to be handled carefully to avoid the pitfalls that Galton found with his eugenics. So criminology, reverse engineering thrill. The idea of crime led me to a group of criminologists working in LA who asked 3 very simple questions. Why do people who have the correct profile not commit the crime? Why do people who have the correct profile and commit the crime not do it all the time? And why do people who don't fit the profile do the crime sometimes? Their approach is to carry out empirical studies based on interviews with criminals. They've been uncovering the minute details of the crime and the sensual dynamics that carry them through the series of events leading up to and through their reward of thrill. One area of particular interest is the sneaky thrill crime, covering shoplifting, graffiti and vandalism, joyriding and fire starting. So if you imagine the fire starter, these criminologists say there have to be 3 conditions met before thrill can be achieved. Firstly, the fire starter needs a practical path of action. So when he goes out in the morning, he physically needs a box of matches. He also needs a way to get to and from the crime scene, so a bus to get into the forest and back again. But then the second condition is that there's a line of interpretation, the way that he sees himself and the way that the outside world perceives him. So what's the bus driver, how is he perceived by the bus driver? Does he know that he's going to go out with criminal intent? And the third point is that there's an emotional process that takes him through these sequence of events, a series of repulsions and seductions within the world that actually make him commit the crime. And it's interesting to note here that the way that a fire starter usually starts is through a ritualistic process of setting fires and putting them out. And through his sort of meditation, he loses his own self-awareness, and it's at that point that he becomes seduced by the situation and actually lets one of the fires go, and that's when he's thrilled. But fire starters don't necessarily go out to start a fire. People are often driven by the need for experience rather than material gain. If we consider the shoplifter who enters into a store not knowing what he wants to steal, but just knowing he wants experience, he wants to be thrilled. He'll look along the shelves and see something as mundane as maybe a chapstick and imagine it in his possession, using it being on the top of his drawers at home. And at that point, the shop becomes a magical but risky game environment where the shopkeeper and the store detectives become the opposition, and they have to avoid the CCTV cameras. But places like the changing rooms become time-out zones where you can stash your goods away from the gaze of the store detectives. But this is where Winona Ryder fell down, because the gates to her stalls actually had slatted louvres in them, so the store detective caught her. And also pieces of apparatus such as the security gates now become the goal line for the shoplifter, where the ultimate thrill is reached on passing them. And so you can see, compared to the original simple model that I showed you of the arousal curve, that the actual journey of choreographed events, as far as the shoplifter is concerned, are very complex. There are a series of peaks and troughs all through his emotional experience before he ultimately receives the reward of the high at the end. So the thrills. I've just given you some examples of how criminologists might deconstruct petty thrill crimes to understand the central dynamics at play. Part of my strategy is to adapt this very specific psychological approach and apply it to a wide breadth of existing thrilling experiences to help create a resource for designing new types of thrill. Thrills exist in limitless forms and contexts. Here are some of the examples of areas I'm drawing inspiration from for my research. So space travel. This is Mark Shuttleworth, the second space tourist, probably about to embark on the world's most expensive thrill ride. But it's been reported that as he was going up the stairs, the cosmonaut below him had to give him a shove into the capsule because he actually started bottling it at the last minute. And this compared to the Russian dog Laika, who was the first animal into space, and she definitely wasn't thrilled by the experience, and in fact died 3 weeks later of starvation whilst orbiting the Earth. But she did actually captivate Russia's imagination and actually thrilled the nation. And now this year, the Chinese are actually putting up their first astronauts, the technonauts, which is obviously a thrilling experience for them, but they're not actually captivating the hearts and minds of the Chinese population because the space race has been and done, and also the Chinese are using old Russian Soyuz space rockets. Air travel. Would this experience be thrilling if you were guaranteed to come out unhurt at the end of it? And in fact, isn't this the kind of risk management that roller coasters undertake for us? Because here you have exactly this similar kind of physical forces on the body. But the interesting thing about the roller coaster is that you can see your destiny stretching out in front of you like a musical score. And also the approach to any experience is very important. If you imagine getting onto an aeroplane at Heathrow Airport and how you actually don't usually see the aeroplane, but your only experience is being in the airport lounge and entering through this tube, and how the aeroplane becomes an extension of the airport lounge and just another room. Compare that to the very rare occasions that you enter an aeroplane from the tarmac using stairs and actually get a sense of the enormity of the experience you're about to undertake. And it's also this shift in perception which I'm very interested in. Here's another example of the evacu-chute, which has actually been given to employees working in high-rise blocks after post-September the 11th, when companies lost huge numbers of their staff. People are now being urged to use these chutes and keep them with them. Now, even though these chutes might not ever be used, They shift your change of perception so that you're now physically constantly aware of your distance from the ground outside, and also of your own mortality, and also the fact that every window is a possible door. Now, this is a photograph. This is Car Journey. This is the photograph by Mel Kilpatrick in the 1950s, who was an insurance photographer and inspired J.G. Ballard's Crash. I'm interested in the car as a theatre, a place where all sorts of human tragedies and sexual intercourse and all sorts of manner of things are played out. Now, this is a million miles away from Disney's vision of the car in Autopia as being just the epitome of the Sunday drive. I think that the Dodgems, or the bumper cars, are a more interesting example, where you're given a piece of equipment and an arena to play in, but after that you're left up to your own devices, so that things such as road rage or sexual encounters can be played out in a natural way. Now, if you think about Scalextrics, which is remotely piloted miniature Formula One racing cars, which is probably quite thrilling for some small kids, but maybe not so for adults, which is the exact problem which the American Air Force are facing at the moment with remotely piloted fighter aircraft. They're finding that pilot performance is down when they're not actually sitting physically inside the aircraft itself. I'm interested in the hunts, the preparation of materials, the stealthy hunt, the final kill, and also the idea of the trophy head. And interested in the slight abstraction in the advent of photography. People are actually replacing the idea of guns with the camera. So the idea of hunting was still there, but the trophy actually changed to become the photograph rather than the head. And in another twist, in the Victorian era, people actually going out and taking film footage of wild animals and actually transporting them back to British fairgrounds, so that this was sort of the advent of arcade games where people were still actually holding the guns but shooting at fictional animals. And indeed, does the gun itself, just as an object, harbour so much emotional potential that just by physically holding and handling one, you could actually evoke the emotion of thrill? The ride. This particular photograph really took me. You'll see when compared to the next photograph that this child is probably its first experience of a thrill, the ride here, but it's obviously a very low risk for this couple here putting her on the donkey. But compare it to this next photograph, where the baby has no perception that this animal is any more dangerous. But I'd say that it's probably the father here and the mother who are actually playing like the fire starter with the threshold of being in or out of control. The aesthetics of thrill. I'm interested in the taste and the touch and the feel of thrill, and all the apparatus and the preparation that goes in into an event before you can be thrilled. So donning the lycra suit before going down the luge. And again in sex, in fetish sex, the whole apparel and the whole amount of objects that are around just the act of sex. And in fact, the pickup and all to do with sexual games, that's also very interesting as well. The simulation. I'm not particularly interested in simulation because there's plenty of problems with simulation, but if you imagine this particular simulator, which is doggedly portraying an Operation Desert Storm operation, and imagine the physical forces when you're in a simulator being thrown left and right and rolled around. Now I'd say compared to the bucking bronco is far more interesting in the fact that you're starting to incorporate the ideas of the carnival and spectators and also some element of skill, but you're only borrowing very lightly on the language of actually the rodeo. Popular fantasy culture. I'm also interested in the way that these rides are contextualized. For example, this ride over 100 years ago, the Ark, used imagery, mythical imagery of dragons and fairies to actually set the scene. But this exact same ride today, known as the waltzer, is borrowing imagery from horror and from science fiction. Toba, engineering the thrill. Once I've reverse engineered existing examples of thrill, I'll use the results as a resource for creating new thrill rides and experiences in different contexts. The end results could be a desktop experience to a piece of furniture or a mammoth metropolitan construction. Once the context is set and the resource developed, I'm going to look to the traditional fairground for inspiration to design new experiences of thrill. I'll explore the idea that thrill is the result of many contributing factors that can collectively be called the Toba. Toba is an old word that expresses the atmosphere of the fairground, the way in which fairground elements play with each other and how they sit within their site. A good showman will carefully craft the experiential journey of the visitor from an enticing front through a collection of side stalls called the side stuff, where you start experimenting with games of chance, to side rides where you start to become mildly aroused, all the way back to the showstopper, which sits at the back of the fairground right, where you actually get the final thrill. The showman also uses all sorts of other mechanisms along the way, like alien smells and foods, amazing graphic imagery, and also at night time to use lighting in a special way to transform the site into a magical environment. I'm also interested in the idea that this experience can be transportable and erected at will at any new site. Toba naturally attracts innovation. The dive bomber ride originally started out as a pilot training device developed by Lee Airlie, but in the depression of the 1920s he realised that he could sell far more as a travelling thrill ride. Toba also allows for experimentation and change. The barrel walk became popular at the turn of the last century. It produced accidental jostling and sexual excitement long before it was acceptable in public. So that was a rapid introduction to chromo11, engineering the thrill. Over the next year I plan to bring my unique collection of skills in interaction design, aeronautical engineering and creative practice to this background research. I hope to bring a fresh perspective to the design of thrill, harnessing positive aspects of a huge untapped resource. I plan to revive the notion of Toba and design previously unimaginable thrill rides and experiences. But unlike Monsieur Caron, I hope to find future collaborators to help me get my ideas off the drawing board. Thanks.